Ever spent 60, 70, maybe even $100 on a metal vise only to find out it's wobbly, the jaws don't line up, and it feels like it was made out of recycled tin cans? Yeah, I've been there too. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how to build a simple, surprisingly strong DIY vise using basic hardware store parts and some scrap wood you probably already have in your shop. The whole thing costs under $15 and it actually works. Plus, stick around to the end because I've got a bonus tip that'll double the gripping power of your jaws without spending an extra penny. Let's get into it. Building your own vise is one of those projects that sounds intimidating until you actually see how it comes together. The truth is, you don't need a machine shop or welding equipment. Once you understand the basic mechanics of how a vise works, you'll realize this is a weekend afternoon project at most. So let's start with the fundamentals. A vise is really just two jaws, one fixed and one that moves, with a screw mechanism that pushes them together. That's it. That's the whole concept. The magic is in the threaded rod. When you turn a threaded rod through a fixed nut, it converts that rotational motion into straight line force, and the beautiful thing is a single half-inch diameter threaded rod can generate hundreds of pounds of clamping pressure. That's more than enough to hold stock steady while you saw, file, drill, or sand. Now, a lot of folks assume wood isn't strong enough for a vise body, but that's just not true. Hardwoods like maple, oak, or even a dense construction-grade lumber like Douglas fir can handle tremendous compression. I've been using a shop-made vise like this for over 3 years now, and it hasn't cracked, split, or loosened up on me once. The key is using the right thickness of material and reinforcing the stress points with proper hardware. So let me walk you through exactly what you need. For materials, you're going to need 2 pieces of hardwood or dense softwood for the jaws. I recommend something at least 1.5 inches thick, 3.5 inches tall, and about 6 inches wide. A cutoff from a 2x4 works perfectly for the fixed jaw, and another matching piece for the moving jaw. You'll also need a base piece. I use a section of 3/4 inch plywood, roughly 8 inches by 12 inches. That gives you a solid platform to mount everything on. For the hardware, pick up 1/2 inch diameter threaded rod, about 10 inches long. You'll need 4 1/2-inch hex nuts, 2 1/2-inch washers, and 2 1/2-inch flange nuts if you can find them. Flange nuts have that wide built-in washer, and they distribute pressure beautifully. You'll also want a handful of 2.5-inch wood screws, some wood glue, and optionally a short piece of 1/2-inch steel or copper pipe, about 4 inches long, for the handle. For tools, you're going to need a drill with a 1/2-inch drill bit, a 3/4 inch spade bit or 4-step bit, a saw for cutting your wood to size, a wrench for tightening nuts, a square, a pencil, and some clamps. Nothing exotic. If you've got a basic shop setup, you already own everything on that list. Now let's start cutting. Take your 2 jaw pieces and make sure they're identical in height and width. I cut mine to 3.5 inches tall by 6 inches wide. Use your square to mark clean, straight cut lines, and take your time here. If these 2 faces aren't flat and square, your vise will never clamp evenly. I always joint the inside faces on a piece of sandpaper laid flat on my table saw top. Just run the face back and forth on 80 grit paper on a known flat surface until you can hold the 2 pieces together and see no light gaps between them. That's your test. No light, no gaps, good clamping. Next, cut your plywood base to 8 inches by 12 inches. This gives you enough room to mount the fixed jaw and still have space behind it. For the moving jaw to travel, mark a center line on the base running the long way, and then mark a center line on both jaw pieces running across their width. Everything is going to reference off these center lines, so take a moment to get them accurate. By the way, if you're finding this helpful so far, go ahead and subscribe to Dale Oakfield's workshop so you don't miss future builds like this one. All right, let's keep going. Here's where the real fun starts, drilling for the threaded rod. Take your moving jaw piece and find that center line you marked. Measure up from the bottom edge 1 3/4 inches and make a mark. That's your center point for the rod hole. Now drill straight through that piece with your half-inch drill bit. Take your time and keep the drill as perpendicular as you can. If you have a drill press, even better, but a handheld drill works fine if you're careful. I like to start from both sides, drilling halfway through from each face so the hole stays centered and you avoid blowout on the back. Now here's the critical part. On the fixed jaw piece, you're not just drilling a half-inch hole. You're going to drill a half-inch hole all the way through, same position, 1 3/4 inches up from the bottom on the center line. But then on the back side of the fixed jaw, you're going to use your 3/4 inch spade bit to drill a counterbore about 3/8 of an inch deep. This counterbore gives you a pocket to seat a hex nut flush into the wood. Take one of your half-inch hex nuts, press it into that counterbore, and it should sit down in there nice and snug. If it's a little loose, don't worry, we'll epoxy it in place. Put a small dab of 5-minute epoxy around the nut, press it in, and let it cure. This captured nut is your anchor. When the threaded rod spins through this nut, it's what creates all your clamping force, so it needs to be solid. On the moving jaw side, thread a hex nut onto the rod, slide the rod through the moving jaw, then thread another hex nut on the inside face. These two nuts sandwich the moving jaw so that when you turn the rod in either direction, the jaw moves with it. Tighten those nuts against each side of the wood with a wrench. Not crazy tight, just snug enough that they bite slightly into the wood surface and don't spin freely. Now let's put it all together. Stand your fixed jaw piece upright on the plywood base, positioned about 2 inches from one end, centered on your long center line. The counterbore with the captured nut should face away from where the moving jaw will be. Pre-drill 3 pilot holes down through the bottom of the plywood up into the fixed jaw and drive your 2.5-inch wood screws up through the base into the jaw. I also run a bead of wood glue on the joint before screwing it down. 3 screws and glue will make that fixed jaw rock solid. Now slide your threaded rod through the captured nut in the fixed jaw. On the other end, you should have your moving jaw already attached to the rod with those 2 sandwiching nuts. Give the rod a spin and watch that moving jaw slide toward the fixed jaw. It should travel smoothly without binding or tilting. If it tilts a little, that just means your holes aren't perfectly aligned, and you can fix that by slightly enlarging the hole in the moving jaw with a round file until the travel is smooth. For the handle, drill a 1/2-inch hole through the exposed end of the threaded rod about 1/2 inch from the tip. If you don't have a way to drill through metal easily, you can simply bend a piece of heavy wire through a hole or even weld a small crossbar on. But the easiest method is to slide that 4-inch piece of pipe over the end of the rod as a T-handle. It gives you great leverage without any drilling at all. Just let it rest in the threads and it'll catch and give you all the turning force you need. Last thing, give the whole vise a light sanding with 120. Grit to knock down any splinters. I like to rub a coat of paste wax on the base where the moving jaw slides to keep the action smooth. You can mount the finished vise to your workbench by driving screws or bolts through the plywood base into your bench top. I use 4 1/4-inch lag bolts, 1 in each corner, and it's not going anywhere. Let's talk about some common problems you might run into and how to handle them. First, if your moving jaw wobbles side to side as it travels, that usually means the hole is oversized or the rod is slightly bent. Try adding a thin wooden guide rail on each side of the moving jaw, just a strip of 1/4-inch plywood screwed to the base that keeps the jaw tracking straight. Second, if the rod is hard to turn, you probably have some misalignment between the 2 jaw holes. Back the rod out, run your 1/2-inch bit through both holes again with the jaws roughly in position, and that should clean things up. A drop of paste wax on the threads also works wonders. Third, if the captured nut spins in its counterbore instead of staying put, your epoxy didn't hold. Pull it out, clean the pocket, rough it up with coarse sandpaper, and reset it with a stronger 2-part epoxy. Let it cure a full 24 hours before using the vise. Fourth, if you're getting dents or marks on your workpieces from the wooden jaws, that's an easy fix. Glue a layer of leather or thin cork to the inside face of each jaw. It grips better and protects your work at the same time. Fifth, if the vise feels like it doesn't have enough clamping pressure, make sure you're using a full 1/2-inch rod and not a 3/8. That extra eighth of an inch in diameter makes a huge difference in the force you can generate. Now for that bonus tip I promised you at the beginning. If you really want to boost the gripping power of this vise, here's what I do. Before you attach the jaw faces, take a wood rasp or coarse 80 grit sandpaper and score a crosshatch pattern into the inside face of each jaw. You're basically cutting shallow grooves in an X pattern, maybe a 1/16 of an inch deep, across the whole clamping surface. What this does is create hundreds of tiny teeth that bite into your workpiece. It's the same principle behind machinist vise jaws that have those serrated faces. The difference in holding power is dramatic. I tested it by clamping a piece of 1/4-inch steel flat bar and trying to yank it out by hand. Without the crosshatch, it slipped out with a firm pull. With the crosshatch, I couldn't budge it, and it costs you absolutely nothing, just 5 minutes with a rasp. For delicate work where you don't want those teeth marks, just keep a pair of leather jaw pads nearby that you can slip in when needed. Best of both worlds. So that's everything you need to build your own shop vise for under $15. If this was helpful, subscribe to Dale Oakfield's workshop and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new project. If you've built your own vise or have a trick that makes yours work even better, drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.